how a school play transformed me into a girl. The air in the auditorium was thick with anticipation as Mr. Thompson, the high school drama teacher, stood before his students, ready to announce the cast for their upcoming production of Romeo and Juliet. His heart pounded with excitement, eager to see his students take on their roles and shine under the stage lights. The room buzzed with chatter and laughter as he read through the names, applause breaking out after each announcement. But as he neared the end of the list, his excitement faltered. Unfortunately, due to a family emergency, Claire won't be able to play Juliet, Mr. Thompson said, his voice tinged with disappointment. The students quieted, whispers spreading like wildfire through the room. "We need a new Juliet. And we need one fast." There was a moment of uneasy silence before Jake, a senior with a quick wit, raised his hand. "Mr. Thompson, why don't you play Juliet? You know the play like the back of your hand." Laughter filled the air, but Mr. Thompson felt his heart race. The idea was absurd. He was a man. How could he possibly step into the role of Juliet? But as the laughter died down, a strange sense of responsibility washed over him. The show must go on, and he couldn't let his students down. With a reluctant nod, he agreed to take on the role, knowing it would be a challenge, but one he was willing to face. Rehearsals began, and Mr. Thompson found himself poring over lines, practicing movements, and immersing himself in Juliet's character. As he stood before the mirror, dressed in the costume, a feeling of vulnerability took hold of him. The fabric clung to him, and for a moment, he felt like he was being swallowed by the role. But as rehearsals continued, something shifted inside him. With the help of the makeup team, he learned to walk with grace, his steps becoming more natural in the dress. Each practice brought him closer to understanding Juliet's heart, her passion, her longing, and her despair. As the days passed, Mr. Thompson found himself drawn deeper into the role. He began to see the beauty in the emotions he was portraying, connecting with Juliet's fierce independence and her yearning for love in ways he hadn't expected. By the time opening night arrived, Mr. Thompson had become more than just the teacher playing a role. He had embraced Juliet's character so fully that the lines between acting and reality began to blur. His best friend Marcus, noticing the subtle changes, remarked, "You're different, man. It's like you've tapped into something new." Mr. Thompson didn't know how to respond. Was it the role? Or was there something deeper at play? When the curtain rose on the first night, he was ready. The bright lights momentarily blinded him, but as soon as he spoke his first line, a sense of peace settled over him. The audience's energy enveloped him, and he became Juliet, her love, her grief, her hope. The performance was a triumph, but it was the final scene that left the greatest impression on him. As Juliet's tragic words left his lips, tears welled up in his eyes, not for the character, but for himself. It was as if something deep within him had awakened. The applause that followed felt distant, and all he could feel was an overwhelming sense of release. He wasn't just playing a role, he was uncovering parts of himself he'd long kept hidden. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Thompson couldn't shake the emotions that had surfaced during the play. He began exploring facets of femininity he had previously pushed aside. The summer break provided him with the perfect opportunity to experiment with clothing, makeup, and self-expression. At first, Marcus expressed concern. "You're not thinking of making this permanent, are you?" he asked over coffee. Mr. Thompson paused, considering the question. "I don't know, Marcus. But for the first time in my life, it feels right. I feel more like myself than I ever have." The students noticed the change in him, too. "Mr. T, you seem so happy lately," one remarked. "It's like you've found who you really are." Their words resonated deeply within him, affirming his desire to continue on this path of self-discovery. Encouraged by their support, Mr. Thompson began attending local LGBTQ+ meetups. The first time he walked into the community center, his heart raced with both fear and excitement. But the welcoming atmosphere, filled with understanding smiles, made him feel like he had found a place where he could truly be himself. The journey was just beginning, but for the first time in a long while, Mr. Thompson felt certain of one thing. He was no longer just a teacher or a performer. He was someone on the brink of discovering who he truly was. One evening, as Mr. Thompson was going through the drama department's costume storage, his fingers brushed against the familiar fabric of the dress he wore as Juliet. Holding it up, memories of his transformative experience flooded back. He felt both a surge of anxiety and an unexpected sense of comfort. On impulse, he decided to wear it to an upcoming LGBTQ+ event, despite the mix of nerves and excitement coursing through him. When he arrived at the event, the energy in the room was electrifying. It was a celebration of self-expression and acceptance, and the vibrant crowd embraced him with open arms. His nerves began to ease as he mingled with others who shared their own stories of self-discovery. For the first time in years, Mr. Thompson felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. He connected with a supportive group of people who encouraged him to continue exploring his true self. Fueled by the warmth of the community, he began living more authentically, gradually allowing himself to embrace this new identity. He chose to go by the name Tina in spaces where he felt safe and understood. Each outing, each act of self-expression, filled him with a sense of liberation, despite the underlying fear of judgment that still lingered. Tina faced many challenges in her journey, especially when dealing with friends and family who didn't always understand. Some were supportive, while others were not as accepting. However, her students' unwavering support helped ground her, and their admiration for her transformation sparked a chain reaction, prompting many to explore their own identities more openly. As Tina's transformation continued, she began taking more concrete steps toward a permanent transition. She sought professional guidance and immersed herself in learning more about her identity. Her passion for theater remained a constant source of inspiration, so it only felt natural to join a local theater troupe where she could combine her love for performance with her evolving self. In rehearsals, Tina felt truly liberated. Acting became an outlet for her to explore both her masculine and feminine sides, merging them in ways that felt natural and authentic. She no longer needed to choose between her old and new selves. She was free to be both, and it was an empowering feeling. Months later, Tina stood before the mirror, her reflection finally aligning with the woman she felt herself to be. The journey from Mr. Thompson to Tina had been long and often difficult, but it had led her to a place of profound self-acceptance. No longer trapped by the constraints of societal expectations, she had learned to walk confidently in both her heels and her boots, embracing the duality of her identity. Now, as she prepared to direct a community theater production, Tina was filled with a sense of pride. The play she once acted in as Juliet had transformed into a metaphor for her own journey of empowerment and authenticity. She had become the director, guiding others in a space where creativity, self-expression, and inclusivity thrived. Tina continued to inspire her students with her courage and authenticity. She organized workshops on embracing one's true self and celebrating the fluidity of identity, using the arts as a powerful tool for self-exploration. Through these workshops, she created a welcoming space for everyone, regardless of where they were in their own journeys of self-discovery. As the curtain fell on her first directorial production, Tina stood backstage, a smile spreading across her face. The applause that filled the theater wasn't just for the show, it was for her, too, for every step she had taken to get to this point. From Mr. Thompson, the high school teacher, to Tina, the woman fully embracing her truth, each chapter of her story had brought her closer to understanding and loving herself. With each new day, Tina continued to write her story, one of courage, growth, and unapologetic self-expression. She had found her place in the world, and there was no turning back. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but she faced it with hope, knowing that every step forward was an affirmation of who she had always been, even when she didn't know it yet.